Something that was, I just want to respond again to what you were saying about like the sort of ethical, how is this as ethical as we maybe think that it is? Something that we had in mind is that people have an understanding that there is a public distrust for Uber's policies in a lot of ways. So a couple of different things that Uber has done in the past. So I think it's really easy to frame this move as something that's just going to be very profitable for us. And so we wanted to prove to you, our shareholders, that though it will be profitable for us, there is a very significant ethical motivation behind it that we want to try and mitigate as much harm in the future as we can.
Is that our motivation or is that a consequence? To justify this wonderful financial thing, which I'm really finding so incredibly fascinating.
Well, I think Katie kind of briefly mentioned it, but the string of controversies that Uber has been involved in the past speak to a need to reboot a corporate ethic. I mean, if you look at Google, when Google recently relaunched and named themselves Alphabet, and when they did this, they changed their corporate ethic structure from don't be evil to do the right thing. So Uber, similarly, needs to have a public, not necessarily mission statement, but like ethics statement or commitment to some position on ethics. And the way that we frame this is looking at how Uber affects the environment and how Uber affects individuals and employees. So I would say that that's our framework. And sorry.
Actually, kind of piggyback on the Gail's question. So the most controversial part of autonomous cars, in my mind, is the AI. What is the AI going to do when a child walks out in front of a car as opposed to an 85-year-old person, let's say? And that's just one example, right? The environmental aspect makes sense financially. I think it's plausible, but inevitably, I feel like we need to take a stance on how that AI works. What are the ethical, what is the ethical framework for the AI that we would support? Because while it's still in development and you spoke to standards, I feel like that's something that we need to get ahead of in terms of what we would be for, or to make decisions to support that. And I think transparency, you guys mentioned that several times, I think that's absolutely critical. The only part missing to the transparency part is what about the rider base and how they feel about using a service that's now going to be powered by an autonomous car versus a human driver. Does that make sense?
Yes. Quickly, I would just say that I think it's probably easier to alert riders and probably with less consequences than drivers, because jobs versus just having an option to order an autonomous car on the app is a little bit simpler than alerting people that they lost their job. But yeah, I don't know if you want to.
Can you expand on the question?
It's really around the AI, because the whole concept is there's no standard, right? So how, but it has to be programmed by a human. So that's hotly debated in terms of what should the autonomous car do in all those situations. We have to program it to do that. So more or less, what is that framework for either influencing that or saying, our cars will take this stance. And that's, obviously that's a big unknown, but I think that ethically, how do we manage that as a company?
Okay, I understand. As I said before, I think we should try to work with the industry as a whole, as well as the state, to decide what program we program the AI with. Personally, I think that maybe some form of utilitarian calculus, which places the driver's needs a little bit lower than perhaps a pedestrian's needs, because they've assumed some of the risks simply by entering the vehicle, and having that knowledge as opposed to someone walking across the street maybe doesn't assume the same level of risk.
I think it's also critical to point out the development period that we're in right now. The testing that's underway is improving the technology already. So I think over time we'll be able to construct a more accurate representation of how the technology behaves, and then we can construct a specific ethic regarding who is the end that we're trying to protect. So.
I also want to add quickly that because 93%, as I mentioned in the presentation, of accidents are because of human error, that although determining the exact calculus we use is important, it will just having a calculus will result in less deaths because we're able to use this technology.
Okay, all right, then we can move on to the feedback. As an employment lawyer, and I tried cases involving Uber, I have to tell you. I honestly thought that because the area is so, it's so up in the air right now as to whether these are even employees and what our obligations are to them as employees or as independent contractors. I honestly thought that was a tremendous distraction for me to the core issue of why are we proposing this technology? How is it beneficial to the public? In other words, I think that if you look at who is the stakeholder, and when you just said utilitarian calculus, you're putting the passenger perhaps, or maybe the pedestrian, on a higher level in the hierarchy than a driver, or a driver is an individual, driver is an employee. What are the benefits for society as a whole? I think if you would frame that way, and then gone into the financial element of, this linkage with Tesla, to me it would have been a cleaner case. I think it's very easy to get lost in the mud of what employment law is right now and the consequences. The whole Uber Lyft employment thing is a lot of politics and a lot of trying to fit a new technology and a new form of doing business into laws that are 100 years old. And that's where you see the tremendous tension of what is doing right, what is doing good, and whether the law is equipped to even handle this under the structure that we have now. So I personally would have rather seen you go into the legal end of it and stay out of employment, but go more into this issue that you went into in terms of torts law, allocation of risk. Is this less riskier to the public? This is very hard. I mean, I live in this world every day of my life. This is very, very hard stuff. And I'm going to tell you, go read Calabrese on the cost of accidents, because I'm going to go home and reread it tomorrow night, relevant to this particular industry. The financial, to me, was it was aspirational, it was a real reach, but this stuff cold. It really shows that this is your comfort level, Even doing something that wasn't clear cut, you were very comfortable pitching this. I mean, I felt most secure in your argument, I will say, because you convinced me financially. More, I think, than the ethical or the legal. And that may be because it's very hard to pitch law to somebody who's been at the rodeo for basically 40 years of my life. But I thought this is a hard case. You picked a hard case.
We always do.
You always do, okay? Sometimes hard cases don't win. But they're phenomenal cases because they make you think. And I think you picked a case to challenge yourselves to start with, and hopefully challenge everybody who's listening to you as well. And that's a very commendable thing to do, to push the envelope a little bit. Real hard one.
I think you all deserve a lot of credit. I think it is a complex case. I think the good news is going into the 10-minute, you really need to focus on the ethics piece of it. You've got some great information in legal and in finance, but I think you really need to figure out an approach that really streamlines. You have a clear utilitarian approach, which may not sit well if you were in the real world with all the outcomes without thinking through some of the ways of mitigating how common good is. But think about it as you do your 10 minutes. Use the best of your material and use it in service of, as Ruth suggests, narrowing your focus, so that however you choose to narrow it, so that there is ethical powerhouse, because what came through in this one, even though ethics was woven in, for me, the financial issue was clearer. The legal was more confusing to me in terms of implications, because it's not my area. And you were talking to shareholders, and you had some good facts. You covered a lot of ground, Katie. So think about, as you come together and how you're going to do this, how you can speak to the best and most powerful arguments of what you have. And that's the beauty of 10 minutes, because you have a lot of richness. You can just cull it a little more. Don't recycle the same, in my view, don't recycle the same presentation and reduce it down to 10. Because you've got real nuggets here. And you can reframe them and realign them in ways that can be very powerful.
Be stronger, yeah, absolutely. Michael?
Yeah, I agree that I think it was incredibly difficult, and the reason I think it was is that you really have like at least a few ethical dilemmas. So I think to Gail's point, figuring out if there's one that's the strongest, or somehow combining those, that's critical, because it was difficult for me to follow the financial reasoning without clearly understanding what the real problem was. The financial aspect, it sounded great, and it seemed like a great idea, but I didn't connect how it solved the actual dilemma for me. But there's clearly an issue. I think it just needs to be, like Gail said, distilled and figure out how those all work together.
I mean, if the goal is that this reduces accidents massively, and the financial pitch that you are making will lead to the stability and growth of an industry, which then will save lives, that's a very easy connection to make. The technology is there. This Uber's affiliation boosts it up, makes it accessible to more people, saves lives, reduces congestion on the roads, makes commuting faster, leaves more time for people to live their lives instead of having road rage. That also saves lives, I guess. Then it all kind of ties together in a very clean way. And to the extent that there's loss of employment, well, those people can all be recycled into alternative forms of employment, because now you've got to build infrastructure all over the country. If there's anything that's going to improve the economy of the United States, and what saved us in the Great Depression, it was building infrastructure.
You might think about the fact that you all are disruptors. And you could argue that this is what 21st century America needs.
It's all about
more disruption in order that we can accomplish greater good, or can accomplish whatever. And I think it's completely safe to be clear about the fact that you are disrupting with the idea of creating a better society.
because that was what Uber was all. Uber was a disruptive force ab initio from its beginning. It's pitched as a negative in terms of, the evil company displacing taxi drivers and also not owning up to employment. But if you perceive it as a social and cultural disruptor, that's for X, leading to common good, you've got a totally different animal on your hands.
With all the same information
With all the
you
same
have.
information, you already have all the
Does that make
information.
sense?
It does.
You have homework for tonight.
Can we comment?
The environmental aspect, I think, is great, and people really like that.
And
but
you've got
the
great
real-
facts to support
Yeah.
that.
Realistically, though, Tesla was successful because they figured out that people care about more than just that.
Right.
And they make sexy cars.
Yeah.
And that's why people, I think, a combination of those
The perfect
things.
storm, the
Just the
perfect storm.
environmental aspect or benefit is not the only, it's important,
Right.
obviously.
But I really admire the fact that when you guys took this on, you took on something that society still hasn't figured out yet.
That's right.
So and we're excited enough, I think, about what you did, that our desire is to see you use the wonderful research in a way that will simplify it for you, because you can control it, as Ruth suggested, by how you frame it, however you do.
This is
good
one
job.
of the few times I've ever seen a presentation where you could take the same subject matter, you could represent it in the way that Gail is suggesting next year, and do the same case twice. I don't know if Tom allows that in the rules, but
You're all
literally-
graduating, so it doesn't matter to you.
Well, they could
That's right, it could be your
It
MBA.
could be their MBA
No, but
presentation, but it could be. It could be, you could take this thing and redo the whole thing and have it be a different case, literally.
I think we spent so much time just to clarify, not because of failure in the presentation, but in an awareness of where you're going with this in an ethics competition.
Right.
And wanting to make
Structure.
sure that you have the best from us to go into the next level.
Yeah, I think that, just to briefly comment to respond, I think that what we were struggling with the most was reining in a case that was this large into 30 minutes. And then I think where we might have lost sight was that instead of tackling one specific issue and providing a trajectory to how to solve it, we instead addressed a swath of issues and
Because there are a
tried
lot
to
of
create a
issues.
palette response that can be diluted, obviously, because it's spread out.
And you don't have case law, as you mentioned. I mean, you don't have anything to go on here.
Well, we do
except
have-
your own.
Do you know where we do have case law, though? We have case law in terms of the manufacturing processes and automation and the consequences of that for workplace accidents. So there's a huge body of case law on this. OSHA, there's a bunch of case law, but and that happens to resound heavily in employment. But you would have had to be a law student to know how to reach out of your little zone
And we don't expect
into that
that.
case law. We can't expect that of you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have to go.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.